Thank you. We are live. Hello. Yeah, this is the show that I have spent the most time preparing. Usually I spend 1 or 2 hours synthesizing my thoughts from throughout the week for the show. And this time I spent 10. And there was just more and more and more and more. So there's so much to say, and we'll do our best to cover as much of it as we can. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Lila, and I'm an intimacy investigator, sometimes maven, and I host the Horizontal with Lila podcast, which is recorded while lying down wearing robes. Both of these beautiful guests, humans, have been on this podcast, Pamela and Nat. And let me introduce you to Pamela. Pamela is a badass sex educator. She's the creator of Sex Ed for Grown-Ass People. She's a bodily empowerment activist, a mother, a sexological bodyworker. She's basically Rosie the Riveter with a speculum. And I love her. And I'm so glad that she's here to have this conversation with us. And Matthew Stillman, I did not prepare your intro, so I'm going to do it on the fly. Matthew Stillman is a soul friend, a scholar of innumerable things, a great thinker, a wanderer, a reverent human being, a student of the Orphan Wisdom School, creator of Primal Dharma, and one of my beloveds. Author, documentarian, and one of my beloveds. Thanks.
And a bodyworker who's thought about consent a lot for this conversation.
Ah, yes. Thank you. So
thank you for that.
One of the things I find so challenging about the digital space is not being able to predict as I can when I'm in a room with somebody when they're going to speak and when they're going to stop speaking. So we do our best.
This is a learning for all of us in the age of Zoom, I think.
I know. I want to intro you to this platform since it is not Zoom and most people are familiar with Zoom. It's designed for podcasters to be seen as well as heard. You can comment and ask questions in the chat at any time, which is on the left-hand side for those of you using desktop, and you have to swipe right for those of you who are on a phone. The show is an hour long, but I'll hang out for a little bit afterwards in case you want to pop in and chat. They've added a tipping feature. It looks like a diamond. It's also in the chat. And if you have technical difficulties, as disclaimer, I might, because I'm in Bali and Indonesia has some dips in its connectivity. And if that happens, both Pamela and Matthew will carry on the show. The show will go on, and they have my notes. So I would like to begin with a question for everyone here. Do you like to be asked, can I kiss you, before your first kiss with someone? Why or why not? So I'm Lila, and I don't like to be asked, can I kiss you? Why? I like to be so attentive to the body signals and the eye contact and the receptivity in the moment that it can flow. That is exciting to me. I have noticed a flag in my turn on whenever anybody asks me if they can kiss me. Pamela?
I think instead of answering that question, I'm going to create a spin-off question, which is, what are the conditions in which I would need to be asked? Sort of apropos of the way that you described it. Like, what situation might I be in where the person who wants to kiss me wouldn't know? Like, wouldn't already be in a deep level of communication with me about whether or not that was going to happen.
Yeah.
And I think if it were me asking the question, can I kiss you, instead of can I kiss you, which is an asking of permission, in a way that isn't necessarily the type of consent. This actually, Matt and I were talking a little bit earlier for a little bit about the conditions of consent and how different conversations about consent are depending on their context. and the assumptions being made. I think in the conditions where I would ask someone, can I kiss you? It would be one where there wasn't enough of a rapport necessarily to know. And I'm curious about the sexual encounter or like the sexual feelings that arise in a space where you're not actually that connected.
Yeah.
And of course, it's still an important question. If you're not sure, then of course you want to ask. But I think for me, the question would come out rather than can I kiss you would be, I want to kiss you. How do you feel about that? Or something more along those lines of like more of a check-in rather than like an achieving of a permission granted to take something that I want.
Yeah. I completely grok what Pamela just said. I would also add that the question, while is a completely valid question, is an impoverished one because it's a labor-saving device. It's saying like, I actually want to have the thing before I'm actually willing to get to the point, which was your first answer, which was, I don't want to be asked, I want it to be so clear. So, but it's sort of a question that emerges in a culture of immediacy and a consumer culture that treats another beautiful person who you feel you have a connection with as another thing to get onto, as opposed to the chin down, get ready to do some work that actually cultivates something that is mysterious and beautiful. Which again, like I understand, like there's plenty of times where you want to like just scramble 2 eggs for dinner because you're like, I don't want to put the labor in. Not everything can be like a completely, perfect jewel of things. But in terms of that question, that's what it brings up for me, that it's an impoverished one, but an understandable one. Basically what Pamela said is right. She is right.
I think what you both said is right, too.
Fine. Let's all argue about it.
Yeah. We'll just argue about how we mutually agree.
The question for those of you who just joined was, do you like to be asked, can I kiss you? Why or why not? And Melissa wanted to grab a spot to answer. Go ahead. Yeah.
Hi, everyone. I'm Melissa.
Hi, Melissa.
Howdy. My gut response to this question was yes. And yes, I'd love to be asked, can I kiss you? And I think that's because I've had so many unwanted kisses come my way, being that I'm a pretty flirtatious person. And so sometimes I'll be just having a good conversation with someone I view as a friend and they'll go for it. And I don't want it. So it's become really sexy to me for someone to ask, even when things feel really heated and close and certain, that they pause and go, can I kiss you? To me, it's enticing and exciting to have my permission asked, even when it's obvious.
Totally. Thank you. Totally.
That's really good. Style points really count for that too. So I think that's included as well. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Thank you, Melissa. Orion, would you like to answer this question on video and we'll grab the spot? And if anybody wants to answer in the chat, now is your moment.
Can I say one other thing about what Melissa just said?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I loved her answer a lot, and I think it's really accurate. And it also shows another aspect which we haven't spoken about yet. We've only been speaking for a few minutes, but how trauma gets deified. So she's had so many bad experiences that the reaction to the bad experiences ends up becoming the better experience.
Deified.
And so, again, she hasn't done anything wrong. I actually love that answer a lot. I also love the way that she was leaning in and smiling about it. But so I wouldn't necessarily ascribe like, Melissa, this is what you've done.
She would like to say more about how trauma is deified. I'm also wanting more. So
first generation trauma, second generation God. So what happens often in a cultural experience is that a horrible thing happens. And then for the next generation, they sort of make that experience special. this is a very intense example, but it is an example. So Black people in the United States were brutalized by slavery. And they were brutalized by slavery under a religious regimen that sort of said religiously, you're bad. You're a Black person and the Bible says this. Some of the most intense evangelistic Christian people, 1 generation after, 2 generations after slavery, were Black people who took on the trauma and said, we essentially deify it. I'm not saying that's what happened with Melissa, but what often happens is that a traumatic experience happens, and then we find a way to turn that into a special thing because we can't bear the trauma of it anymore. So you see that with kinks all the time. You get brutalized by a whip when you're a child, it becomes a thing of your turn on. Again, that's not a problem, but the trauma gets deified.
Okay, thanks, Matthew. Orion, would you like to answer the question?
Sure, I want to answer the question. I think what Matthew's talking about is reclaiming. But to answer the question, I would say that I love to be asked, and I like to ask. I think it's fun, sexy. Yeah, you just like look someone in the eyes, especially when you put that energy. I definitely am more apt to do it with someone new because obviously I don't want to make a fool of myself. I say, I just feel this thing, and I just wanted to, know, and depending on the situation, right, I'll have some words, but I'll just kind of talk about the feelings that I'm feeling, and I want to know if you feel it too, and should we act on it? Because I think that'd be really awesome. If you think it's awesome, and then let's do it.
Adorable.
So that's my quick answer. But yes, Matthew, I can't like not answer, especially as a Black.
Oh, totally.
Especially as a Black person. I think there's a bit of reclaiming going on. It happens in a variety of ways, which I don't even need to mention because they're very clear and distinct. And it happens with language and religion and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
I think people are more used to the word of reclaiming as opposed to deification. But I agree with you. I just want to just say that. But I wanted to use the word reclaim because I think sometimes I think people may take it could potentially be received in a way that I don't think you intend.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah.
Where are you calling from? Your house is really nice.
Oh, yes, this is my home. Yeah, I'm a very minimalist. Yeah. I'm in the Bronx, and
you're in the Bronx.
Yep.
I'm in Harlem.
Oh, hey, look at that. We should connect sometime. But anyways,
I'm happy.
Do it. I'm going to share my screen for a moment, apropos of this question that I asked, to share a little bit of this video by Lacey Green, who is a fabulous, I think, teen, maybe not anymore, but a peer-to-peer sex educator.
Early 20s now.
So here it is. Can you see it?
Not yet.
No, I can't.
Oh, hi, babes. You know what is so deliciously hot to me? I'm with a person I like, and there's a little bit of sexual tension, and then they lean over and they're like, "Can I kiss you?" Usually. Why is it so sexy? Because they asked for consent if it was okay. Which, one, that they respect me, and two, that they've got some basic sexual communication down. Hot. But consent isn't just hot, it's also mandatory. Sexual contact without consent is assault or rape. Here's the thing, people often think of sexual coercion as something that's, violent or physically restraining. In reality, sexual coercion is often much more subtle. It happens between two people who know and maybe even trust each other. The perpetrator will use pressure, manipulation, drugs, alcohol, and force to initiate sexual contact.
Love, we can't. Oh, all right.
Oh.
She dipped out. Oh, wait.
She's there.
She's there.
She's back.
Did you see that video?
We didn't see
No, we
it.
heard it.
We heard the audio.
We heard it though.
Oh, what a bummer. I thought I was sharing my screen.
We got the idea.
I mean,
Okay.
yeah, that's pretty clear.
It's a great video, and she's adorable, so I wanted you to see it. But okay, well, that I hope it will work because there's other things I want to show you. So I might need to take a moment when we get to that point to make sure that that's happening. I wanted to share with you, I wound up making a let's call it a lengthy but by no means exhaustive list of things that are not consent. So most of you saw the image that promoted this show, which is a picture that I took at DragCon 2019, RuPaul's DragCon in New York last year. And it said, drag is not consent. Basically, please still ask people before and get their assent before taking a photograph of them. So that inspired me to write a list of other things that are not consent. And here it is. It's kind of like a list poem in a way. Ready? Wearing clothes, not wearing clothes, wearing skimpy clothes, a first date, a second date, any number date, talking about sex on the internet, being in a sexual relationship, being in any kind of relationship, having had sex before, having made agreements before, being pretty, being family, being a celebrity, being a child, flirting, sexting, suggestive slogans on t-shirts, being intoxicated, being a woman, being an intoxicated woman, going over to someone's apartment, staying over at someone's apartment, waking up in someone's apartment, lying down with someone, being asleep, being unconscious, being in close quarters, being on the beach, being trans, being queer, being pregnant, being a Black person who has hair, walking down the street, attending a concert, festival, conference, gathering of any kind, working in the sex industry, working in a bar, working in an office, working on a set, working for a boss, doing a sex scene on camera, riding a crowded subway, and not saying no. None of those things constitute consent, not a one. And they're all examples of things that have been used to assume consent. Oh, thanks. I got a little applause from Melissa. Thank you so much. Ryan, I'm going to step you down for now. Thank you so much for joining. And I want to begin with a few premises that I am operating from, so you know where I'm coming from with this conversation. And then these brilliant people, I'm sure, will have plenty of things to say about them. The Planned Parenthood definition of consent is very simple: actively agreeing to be sexual with someone. A premise that I'm operating from is that if someone were looking for evidence of us behaving badly or acting in a gray area around consent, they could probably find it for most of us. They could certainly find it for me. One particular incident stands out. So,
me too.
We are not perfect with this, right? We are learning, and we are active engagement with this idea and with respect. And then if we err, as we will err, then a way forward is an acknowledgement of the impact that our action had, rather than a defense of our intent. It wasn't my intent to hurt. I didn't mean to, I didn't, but an acknowledgement of the harm caused, and then perhaps an apology and an offer of making amends. So that's one premise that I'm operating from. I'm thinking of consent culture as an antidote to rape culture. And there's been an evolution.
As an antidote.
Can you define rape culture?
Yes, a culture in which, didn't do it in my notes. A culture in
got
which,
it
people's bodies who are not at the top of the privileged food chain are expected to be available for the desires of others. That's my stab at it right now. Either of you want to take a swing?
Yeah, I do. Right now, I'm thinking of rape culture as a carryover from a time in which people's bodies could legally be the property of other people. And I find that those same people who previously were legally the property of others, specifically the property of white men, are still the people who are marginalized. Those are the communities that we speak of as, or the people that we speak of as being marginalized now, whether it's people of color or women or trans folks or queer folks or whatever. Those are the people who tend to suffer most within what we call rape culture. And I find that the ideas of ownership of bodies and property, like bodies as property, is a huge piece of what plays into the kind of power dynamics in a culture where some people are expected to be sexually available at the will of those who hold more power than they do socially.
And I would add just to that, that I think part and parcel to that is a de-animizing of those people, to turn them, to thingify them, that they become less than human, and ergo their consent is not required, but their availability is.
Yeah, objectification is the usual word, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. But thingification is the one that I came up with
like
instead of the
I do
word
like yours.
actually.
I want people to understand that that's what you're talking about as well. Objectification.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
I'm sticking with thingify. Really sticking.
Okay.
With it. Yeah.
Another premise that I'm operating under is that we are coming from an oppressively gendered script in which people who are considered to be women are the gatekeepers of sexuality, and people who are considered to be men are the ones knocking on the gate. And this hurts everybody.
Yeah, that's a terrible script.
Yeah.
But also plays into all sorts of ideas that I'm super interested in around like value, body value, different metrics of body value. We were talking earlier about virginity, just the construct of virginity as like a thing that you then can lose, right? Or someone can take it from you. And what that means. I mean, for me as a sex ed teacher and someone who's constantly talking about anatomy, like discussing the hymen with a room full of people with internal sexual anatomy as a part of the body that may or may not exist from birth. And it may exist and then there's sexual penetration and then it heals. Or it was never there to begin with. And in so many cultures in the world where one has to basically like fake having an intact hymen in order to be suitable for marriage. There's just like, there's so much built around that. So in a world where, you know, women identified people are the gatekeepers of sex, there's just, it's so loaded, you know, because then it's like, of course, the only sex that counts is penis and vagina penetrative sex, right?
Right.
For one.
The sex that is considered sex, yeah. The only sex that is sex, which is crazy, right? Yeah. And
it's procreative sex.
What?
I mean, that's procreative sex, right? So that's the only sex that counts.
Right. And we're all working to expand people's notions, I think, of sex, all of us.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I'm reading what Cameron wrote.
Yeah, me too.
So what he's thinking about is his students, and how his male students felt it was more manly and I assume more sexy to just know that a woman's into it and go for the kiss rather than asking. And, you know, it's unpopular in consent culture to express this. I feel the same way about myself. That's how I like it. So I appreciate that viewpoint. The thing is, for that viewpoint, you need to have a fair amount of awareness. And even with great awareness, you're going to make missteps, you know? Cameron says not everyone felt this way.
Two things. I want to qualify what I said before about not liking to be asked, because I do sometimes like to be asked and it depends on the context.
Mm-hmm.
So there's that. Second is that I have to organize this thought for a second. Sorry, I'll come back.
Okay. So I'm going to try sharing my screen while you're thinking. And I would like to make this work. So I need to unlock the seats. Okay.
Okay, I got it. The question of whether or not one is asking or wants to be asked about whether one wants to be kissed, I think has to do a lot with whether the person asking is operating from a place of power with or a place of power over.
Yeah.
In either context.
And we're definitely going to talk about power.
No doubt.
Sure. Okay. I'm going to try sharing now.
Okay. Can you see the chat when you screen share?
Oh, I can't. No, the chat's black when I, okay, I can see the chat, yes, but, oh, okay, I think I've done it.
Yes, something's happening.
It's into infinity, huh?
Yep.
Yeah.
Wow. We're in the Matrix. Okay. So great. This is the image I was talking about before. Can you see it?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Drag is not consent. If you would like a photo, always ask first and respect that person's right to say no. We're not there yet, are we? Nope. Okay. But we're almost here. So I'm going to skip over actually the consent culture flaws and save them for later because I think they're really powerful and they open up also another show, basically another can of worms. And if we start talking about them now, I think it will take over the entire show. So I want to talk about models. And this is a non-consensuality spectrum that I got from Dr. Jana Grongalova, the sex scientist. I can hear you typing, so you might want to mute yourself if you're typing. It's very loud, clickety clackety. So here it is. So 4 quadrants. Wanted and consent. Okay, very clickety. Can you
mute yourself if you're going to type?
Oops, sorry.
Thank you. So wanted and consensual, we know, right? That's the enthusiastic consent. I'm into it. I agree. Wanted but non-consensual, people don't usually talk about. So that might be with somebody who cannot provide consent, like a child. For instance, I was told later on that I was touched as a child. I don't remember it. I'm sure that I liked it. I'm sure that I wanted it, but it was not consensual. That's one example of how it could be wanted, but not consensual. Unwanted and non-consensual we're very familiar with. Coercion, rape, sexual assault. And then unwanted but consensual is one of the most important pieces that I think is.
Uh-oh.
There she is.
Hello.
Coming back.
Unwanted but consensual, I think, is one of the most important pieces that isn't often talked about, right? So wrong. It's yes, unwanted but consensual, right? So this is regrettable sex, which I've had my fair share of regrettable sex. It was not sexual assault. I did consent. I did agree, but I didn't want it. And so a lot of things are happening that I see in my community where regrettable sex is turned into an allegation of assault after the fact.
Huh.
I think it's very important to think about those ones that are less thought about. So those, again, would be the unwanted but consensual and the wanted but non-consensual. Any thoughts on those?
That is where the Me Too conversation got really interesting for me, was when that letter came out, or whatever, that piece came out about the young woman who slept with Aziz Ansari.
Aziz Ansari, yeah.
And the reaction to that was incredible because there were all these people, men and women both, like a whole camp of people of all kinds, all backgrounds, who were like, that's bad sex. Everyone has bad sex. Get over it. That's not violent. Fuck you, basically, for writing this piece. And then the reaction to that, which I found really kind of miraculous in its nuance and the questions that it teased out of the whole conversation that started with Me Too on the scale that it did, which was, well, why is bad sex so normal, especially for women? Like, what is it that is creating conditions of pressure around social currency and other things that are leading all sorts of people, but women, prominently women, let's say, certainly not only women, but notably women, to have sex that they don't fucking want to have.
Oh yeah.
Which, you know, I've had plenty of, or I did early in my life. A lot of it earlier.
Yeah, I kind of want to say anybody else, and if we were in a room together and we did a show of hands, like anybody else, like probably every hand would be raised.
Yeah.
Also, the amount of times that I've, for instance, brought a man to ejaculation because I felt I had to, because we were already in it, is like legion, is so many. And I remember so many times thinking, oh, come on, just please come, just so I could feel like I fulfilled my contract and gotten it over with. Yeah.
Because what happens in the middle of a sexual act when you actually just don't want to be there and change your mind, and you're like, I don't want to be, you know, you're in the midst of it and you're like, I think we're done here. I don't want to, I am having weird feelings. I don't want to continue to do this. The reaction that then comes has a range all the way into violent.
Yes, absolutely.
Violence, yeah.
And it's really scary. Yeah, it's really scary to do that. And so that's a very likely time for the freeze or fawn response, sympathetic nervous system response to happen, where you're like, okay, just do it. Just come. Okay. Or you're like, yeah, babe, I've done a lot of this, right? Like, oh yeah, come inside me, you know, just to get it done.
Yeah, fawning.
Absolutely. I've both freezed and fawned. Yeah, and it's extremely common, particularly for those of us who are in fear of violence, which is not just women, but those of us who are in fear of physical violence and harm.
Yeah.
So I want to talk about this enthusiastic consent model and show you the fries, because this is, I think, the most common model that people are talking about right now with enthusiastic consent. I'm going to share my screen again.
Look at you, all tech savvy.
So
yeah, really. Screen sharing and everything.
Here's fries. So consent must be freely given. It must be reversible. That's what we were just talking about. You must be able to change your mind at any point and take back the consent. And it must stop then, right? Otherwise, it's no longer consensual. It must be informed.
Yeah, a yes doesn't mean anything if a no isn't possible.
Indeed. Yeah, there's two phrases that I put in the document about that are particularly well worded. And they are, nope.
I didn't get to read the whole thing. It was so
yes,
long.
I know. So they are from Alexandra Solomon. A yes is not a yes unless no is an equally valid option. And then from Marsha B, who's the co-founder of Cuddle Party, if you can't say if you can't say no, your yes is meaningless.
Fuck yeah.
And at first I found that super harsh, and I've completely come around. I totally believe it. So yes, freely given. Reversible. Informed. So you must be given important intel which might affect your decision. For example, STI status, relationship status, risks, contraception being used, right? You need to have all that information. Otherwise, you don't know what you're consenting to.
And also, actually, an example given in the Planned Parenthood document about informed is things like, if a partner says, yes, I'm going to use a condom, but then doesn't use one, that does not constitute consent.
Right.
Because you don't have the correct information.
Clear violation. Yes, absolutely. The E is enthusiastic. You got to be into it. You know, a sure Or I have a resource that I'm going to share later that's like the okay zone. Like, okay, that's not enthusiastic consent, you know? Or like, yeah, okay, go, sure. You want to do that? Sure. No, that's not enthusiastic consent. And it must be specific, right? So you got to know what you are saying yes to. Can I touch you is very general. May I grab your ass is specific. So how you are doing it is important.
And that's a skill all to its own. I mean, that particular part is like, there's so much to say about that. Emotional literacy, being able to actually identify your own feelings. These are all things that go part and parcel with developing relationship-bound consent.
Yeah. So that's the Fry's model of consent.
I have something to say about the enthusiasm part of that.
Please.
I was going to say something.
Which I think is going to segue us into talking about Betty Martin's work.
We are just about there. Perfect.
Yeah. So Betty Martin is the amazing educator, has the sort of not unique but pretty rare distinction of being a grandma and a sex worker, and is a genius and a darling, and created a tool called the Wheel of Consent, which we're going to look at in a minute. Within the
But you could spend weeks on just that.
That's a whole thing in and of itself. And anybody who hasn't heard of her, I recommend going to her website. It's full of free goodies and videos and tons of information. It's so good. It's so generous. The Wheel of Consent, within it, the one of the two axes, it's divided into 4 quadrants, and we'll look at it. Do you want to bring it up, actually?
I will. Yes.
So within the 4 quadrants, one axis is of action. One person is doing and the other is being done to. And the other axis is of benefit. So who is giving the gift and who is receiving the gift. And within those 4 quadrants, there is space within a consenting relationship and within a satisfying exchange for one person to allow the other to touch them for their own benefit. So not to touch to please the person being touched, but to touch the way that you want to touch the other person. And I think that there's a lot of space for that, actually. And it needs, of course, to be carefully negotiated, because the gray area from touching for your own pleasure, where that kind of segues into non-consensual touch, where that segues into something that feels more like assault, it's a very quick transition, or can be. But I still feel like, especially within the context, at least for me personally, within the context of a partnership, I've been with one of my partners for almost 9 years and the other for almost 6. And within the context of an established, trusting, mutual sexual relationship, there is a lot of space for like, you are super turned on and I love you. And so I'm going to get down with you. Even though I like have 25 things to do and kind of am not in the same mood, but like, okay, like, let's do it. Yeah. And that's not me being
coercive.
Pressured. Yeah, no, not at all. That's me allowing access to my body because I trust the person who is wanting that.
And that's your partner serving, right? That's the other side. In that scenario, they are serving and you're allowing?
They are taking and I'm allowing. So it's this axis.
I thought that it was for your pleasure because you were turned on.
If my partner was like, I am super turned on, and I was like, I have like 4 hours of work ahead of me tonight, so
yes, got it. I thought it was you in that scenario.
So I would be like lower left, I would be allowing, and my partner would be taking, but that would still be consensual. And it would be actually in a different way, super hot, I think, for me.
Yes.
And that's also an axis that plays out a lot in BDSM scenes. Like that's
indeed
a lot of taking and allowing within a consensual model.
The question I was encouraged to ask in regards to the Wheel of Consent is, who is the pleasure for?
Sure. Yeah, I was phrasing that as benefit.
Yep.
Who is the pleasure for and who is the doer of the action?
Do you want this up still, this diagram?
No, I'm good. Does that make sense, what I said?
Yeah, it does. Can I say one thing also about enthusiasm, which I also wonder about in terms of consent? It also has this sort of flattening effect that we all need to be the same. Like from a spectrum perspective, you definitely don't want someone who's really into it and someone who's really not. But I think that can be included in consent is, I trust you enough to go with you, even if I'm not into it as much as you are. And so that allows for it doesn't need to be a polarity that it's opposites, but that there's a space to say, I'm willing to walk a little bit on this road and to see how this plays out between us. Because enthusiasm, if both people are equally enthusiastic, that can induce speed, which can then induce forgetting. You can sort of be like, oh, we're both into this? Great, let's just like go. As opposed to, how do we actually go a little bit slower? And sometimes someone being a little bit less enthusiastic can inspire a bit more courtship as opposed to seduction in the engagement, provided it's sexual.
So I found, as I was researching, a sort of update to this for our times for digital and video. So I'm gonna share that diagram. I had pulled it up a moment ago, but I'm gonna share it now. And I think that's incredibly important that we start thinking about how to apply these, being that many of us are having remote sex and are having sex mitigated through screens, which can be recorded, which can be screenshot, right? So we need to think about, I said this, I went live a moment ago and did a little yoga and chatted a little bit. And I said, you got to think, like in the Sex at a Distance show, we talked about this. You got to think that if you send something to someone, a text, a sext, a photo, a video, it may end up on the internet.
Can we just acknowledge that Sunny Megatron just jumped on and like, she's a legend?
Welcome.
Wow.
So cool.
Wow. Amazing. I feel so lucky to be like in a digital space with Sunny Megatron on. Wow, that's amazing.
Well, you know, you can be, because Sunny has her own show on Get Vocal that you can join every week on Wednesday night. So you can be in the space with her once.
This is like accidentally bumping into like a really famous person, though. It's different, but good to know. Thank you.
Okay, Matt, are you done fanboying?
Sorry,
it's adorable.
It's a natural response,
and Sunny loves it. Yes, you should definitely join Sunny's show. They are so well curated. I really love what they're doing over there at American Sex. I'm going to share my screen again to show this visual or version of the consent diagram. Is adapted for video. So in the quadrants, we have revealing. Yeah, I'll show you that. Unveiling, showing, maybe a striptease. Actually, striptease would be more in performing, right? May I show you this? Dancing, exhibiting. So revealing would be less performative, from what I understand it. Witnessing, space holding, seeing. Often that's with a sense of compassionate neutrality. And then watching, appreciating, enjoying, being a spectator. Would you show me this? So I think these are very interesting. Does anybody want to address any of these before I take this diagram down?
I need to look at it more, but I'm glad
I will put these things in the chat at the end. So I have a list of resources and I will pop them in the chat along with these. When I stop screen sharing, it kicks me off the video. I don't understand why it does that, but so each time I have to rejoin. Here we go. So that's the Wheel of Consent adapted for video. And then I wanted to talk about some tools. We have 15 minutes left to the show, so I know we're not necessarily the speediest people when we communicate, so I'm just going to be a little about my about my sharing of these things, and then know that most of it we won't get to. But I did want to offer some tools. So a tool that can be used before a sexual encounter is a bidding process, and it can go fears. I like to start with fears, boundaries, intentions, desires. So technically it would be F bidding. Forbidding. But that's like forbidden. So F bid, but fears, boundaries, intentions, desires. And I want to make a distinction between intentions and desires because people often ask about that. So if we're going to go to a sex party together, my intention might be, and it has been actually pretty much every time I've gone to a sex party with a partner, which is my preferred way to go. My intention is to connect with my partner in a really delicious way inside a sexual atmosphere and container. That's my intention. And my desire might be for him to go down on me and me to be restrained. So my intention is for the feel, the vibe, what I want to cultivate with myself and that person, and then the desires could be, the fantasy you want to play out, or particular sex acts, or particular things you want to use. So that's one that I've used to great effect in my life. However, try not to do it right before the thing. Okay, so you do it 10 minutes before the play party starts, you might fuck up your whole play party. And I've never done that. I don't know what that's like at all.
Very convincing.
Yeah.
Really? Yeah.
Totally get it.
Sex educator Amanda Rue wanted to share that she and her sex education partner talk about establishing mutual desire as the prerequisite. So establishing the mutual desire, then exploring how is that going to play out, and then coming into an alignment, which would maybe take some negotiation or some compromise, and an agreement. So that's what she talks about having beforehand. Of course, these are in scenarios where you're taking the time to talk about these things beforehand, and many, many, many of us are not doing that, right? We find ourselves in the situation and we're in the moment, seeing how we can negotiate and navigate.
I would like to mention Reid Mihalko's 2-minute Safer Sex elevator speech.
Thank you.
That's a really great.
I love that. I love that. And I love that especially because we do it in the episode that I recorded with him that has never been released, but is probably going to be released in a few weeks. So it's coming soon, a really great example of it, of us doing that together. And what we conclude from that Safer Sex elevator speech is that I'm not really a good match to have sex with Reid because his level of sluttiness doesn't make me feel very comfortable. So that's the agreement that we came to.
That's so good to know.
Good to know, yeah.
Yeah, it's an excellent resource, the Safer Sex elevator speech. Do you know what's in it? Do you want to rattle that off? Or
Sure. Yes. So I saw Reid teach at the Pleasure Chest in Los Angeles, and it was one of the major things that helped me get out of my shitty marriage. I attribute a lot of the like levering of me to get out of this thing to just sitting and listening to him talk about like dating your species, and they might be really great and still not really great for you, and like all of these things that I was just like, oh, like it made a huge difference to hear him at that moment. It was awesome. Safer Sex elevator speech. He describes, I'm going to quote him as best I can. It's hard to do, but maybe not so hard to do. He describes going into a situation, seeing a person that he finds attractive and approaching them and saying, "Hi, I'm Reid Mihalko. Would you like to hear my Safer Sex elevator speech?" And the person, based on their first reaction, will already kind of give a little bit of it away. Because if they're like, "Oh my God, what? No, thank you, no," then he's like, "Cool, peace out." But if they're like, "Sure," or if they're like, "Yes, tell me more," he will then say, "Okay, great." So I I am polyamorous and really slutty and pretty queer. I have between, I have no idea. I don't remember his details. I have between 4 and 10 sexual partners at any given moment. I do have a primary partner. I don't have penis and vagina sex with anyone except for my primary. And I use barrier protection with everyone else. I tested negative for STIs the last time I was tested, which is now 2 months ago. I've not been tested since. I really enjoy receiving very firm touch. I like giving head to women with strap-ons. I like this. I really do not like being tickled at all. If you tickle me, I will probably kick you. How about you? And this will run down the list of safety, relationship status, STI status, likes and dislikes pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Just to give someone.
And in my episode, we also, sorry.
No, just basically to lay out the feast, the possible feast. And if the person is that feast is not for me. And interestingly, in the class where I heard him first describe this at the pleasure test, which is now years ago, there was a person in the audience who was, oh, Lila's gone. Okay, she'll be back. I'm going to keep going. There was a person in the audience who raised his hand who was a leather daddy. He was this, super intense man, sweet man. Yep. Said, I am a very hardcore sadist. So if I did that, I would probably get arrested. What do you recommend for me? And Reed's recommendation, which I thought was great, was well, pick your audience. Don't do it at the library. But if you go into a BDSM space, then it's pretty safe to assume that if you're talking to somebody in that space and you say, I'm a really intense sadist and I like to do the following things and I don't like the following, and this is what I'm looking for, that you will probably find a taker. And, even if somebody is oh my God, no, I would never get away from me. He's great. All you have to do is thank that person for taking care of themselves. It's not personal. It's not about you. It's about them either feeling a resonance with what you're saying or not. And if they take themselves out of the pool of possibilities for you, how much work have they just done for you to remove themselves? That they're not the one that you want to play with. So they have done that. They've done you a great service, essentially, in letting you know immediately that they're not going to be an appropriate person to continue that conversation with, which I thought was so fucking cool.
Yeah.
What a graceful, yeah, it's just so elegant. It's so honest and it's so elegant and it's so friendly in every way. I loved it.
Yeah, I've never heard him teach that, though I've heard it before. He did a version of that when I became a cuddle party facilitator, and sort of a version of that for cuddling.
Right.
So, yeah.
Lila just wrote, can you put in a word for safe words? Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
So safe words, and I'm curious actually what you'll say about this, Matt. Safe words are basically a sort of code, an easy to remember code that you can carry with you from a pre-negotiated conversation into a sexual encounter that you will easily remember, because you go, of course, into an altered state when you're screwing around and when it's good, or even when it's, regardless, you go into an altered state when you are being intimate with someone, and may agree to things or safe gesture. Totally. Thank you, Cameron. You may agree to things in the moment that you actually don't want and that you pre-negotiated not to do. And a safe word will be something that is agreed upon beforehand, that will be the most common ones are the traffic signals, right? So green is a yes, yellow is a slow down, and a red is a stop. And red is usually a really strong stop. If that happens at a party, people may come to assist you if they hear red. But in a private encounter, it can take on all sorts of different shapes and meanings, but it always stands to shape what's happening in a way that is a code that is pre-established, regardless of what's going on in the encounter. Yeah, or a safe gesture is great too, especially, if speech is impossible, of course. Yeah, there has to be a safe gesture.
I thank you for that. And in terms of my thoughts on it, I think that they are a necessary tool for the structures that people enter into. But in one way, they are, it can be a taking of the responsibility away from the person you're with, but also from other people around you. I'm taken by the work of the intentional community, Tamara in Portugal, and they have a different approach to safe words, which is that you have people whose job it is to be watching you having sex, not for their own enjoyment, but for actually holding the space. And so if there were, person X and person Y, you essentially have people who are on person X's team, for lack of a better term, who are people's on person Y's team, who are sort of looking out for what's going on and are there in the space just to hold space for it. And again, not for them to like be turned on by it. It doesn't mean that they're right in it either, like that. But they're, from some distance away, just sort of keeping an eye for things that you yourself can't see. And that is that takes, they've worked on developing that community for 50 years. So it's not something that's easily gotten, but to have a sense of community that you that you have something that looks like elders around you who are willing to put in the time to make sure your relational experiences are full and you're watching for things that you don't even know to look for, would be a remarkable thing, and I've never experienced it.
I can't even imagine.
I can't either, but I've heard of people who have had that experience, and I'm like, I've never had that experience, and I want it. Like I'm having a memory of something that I've never experienced.
Starting up again. I'll share that the only thing that I can think of in a moment, so some people use just stoplight stuff because they can remember it, right? Yellow, like slow down, and red, stop. That doesn't work for me, but it works for a lot of people. What works for me is to say too much. Too much. That's what I remember.
Yep.
That's what I will be able to say if it is too much. So that's mine.
Mm-hmm.
Let me presence that technically there are 3 minutes left for the show. And my computer froze. So I'm starting it back up and hoping to be able to access my notes again. But I did want to talk about some different types of consent. So the one that the enthusiastic consent model is basically relying on is this, explicit consent, right? So you must have explicit consent, explicit verbal consent for every single escalation and every single act. And it can be hard to figure out, well, what's an act? What's an escalation? If I touch your elbow, am I allowed to touch your shoulder? If I touch your breasts, am I allowed to touch your butt? It's like, can be hard to figure out what that is. So I think people tend to err on the side of caution when they use that model and they ask about just about everything. And a lot of people feel really taken care of, particularly folks who have experienced sexual trauma in their past, feel very held and taken care of by this model.
Yes.
It's a beautiful thing to be able to do and to know how to do.
Yeah.
There is also, on the complete other side of the spectrum, blanket consent, which is I give you consent to do anything, and it could be for a certain particular amount of time, or it could be within the domain of certain activities, right? So I once had a saturation, which was basically like a sensory play gangbang, which was amazing. So good. Just thinking about it, I feel delicious. And for it, I created what I called a menu of sensory delights. And I organized it like a menu. Everything on it, every single person present, which was 5 people, the 5 people there were invited to do any of those things, any of those 25 things on the menu to me. So I gave them blanket consent for this menu of things,
Hmm.
which is one way that you can do blanket consent. And I loved it because I knew, okay, these are the things that they're going to do. These are the things that they're going to choose from. And I'm okay with all of these people doing all of these things. So I can be blindfolded and we're good.
Cool. That's fun.
Yeah, very cool.
I love that.
And then there is the model that I enjoy in my dating life, which is opt-out consent, which is that we non-verbally communicate and escalate until there's something that one of us wants to opt out of, and then we speak it.
So that you're speaking the no, but not requiring that you speak the yes as you go. You're assuming the yes until someone says no.
Yeah.
Yes, which I think is kind of vilified as the old model with the gatekeeper and the pursuer. But I'm talking about it feels different to me. It feels very different. I think because both of us are agreeing that that we're working under that opt-out model. Or in the case of a threesome that I had, what we set up was, okay, let's play, and then if anybody doesn't want to do something, then just express it. And we were also pretty attuned to each other, so we didn't actually need to do that.
Sure. I'd like to propose a different word for consent, or a word instead of consent at this point. Now
I would love that.
At this. And the word I'd like to propose is agency, because that's much more of an opt-out agency. You know, because it doesn't assume, I mean, consent is like, I would like permission to do this thing to you, as opposed to, I would like to do this thing, you know, like I would like to do this thing with you. I would like to create this thing with you. I am the doer. Like both people are the doers.
I love the word agency.
You too.
However, that is included, what you just spoke about is included on the Wheel of Consent, right? Betty Martin's Wheel of Consent.
Yes. I don't know that she says it explicitly, but I hope so.
Well, but the scenario you just described, right? The being the doers, everybody involved being the doers. No?
She seems to have it so that one person. Yes, yeah. I mean, it could be for sure understood that way. Most of what I see in the Wheel of Consent is that one person is the doer, the other person is the receiver, and then who is the receiver of the pleasure or the receiver of the gift of it can change. I mean, it all can change.
Yeah, and I love that there's that nuance there. I also kind of resist it a little bit.
Sure.
Because who's to say that we can't both be taking pleasure at the same time?
This is exactly.
Or both be giving pleasure at the same time.
That's the con in consent. From an etymological perspective, that means together.
Right. Consensuality, right?
Yeah.
Right. But it's divided in such a way that, anyway. So there's just a few more things. We're a little bit over time, but there's just a few more things I wanted to toss into the pot before we end the broadcast, which I'm going to have to try and get on my computer to do. Otherwise, we're going to go on forever. Before I end the broadcast and we just hang and chat, which is some of my favorite parts. So those of you who are here live, yay. I wanted to put in a word for safe porting, which is a term from the kink world. And safe porting is, I tell you what I'm going to do before I do it. And then I wait. So I might say, I'm going to take you in my mouth now. And then I wait. And I look for yeses in the body, or I wait for a verbal yes if that's the kind of way that I'm playing. But I love safe porting because it slows things down a little bit. And you declare, and then you wait. And then you get to feel, what does that bring up in the person? Also, on the sexy side, what it does is create also anticipation, because maybe you don't do it right away. You know, you say you're going to do it, but when's it going to happen? When's it gonna happen? She said she was gonna do it. When's it gonna happen? You know, so I think there's that fun of playing with anticipation. Very toppy. And check-ins during are possible, right? Like, do you like this? Do you want more? Would you like it this way? So these are simple words that you can use to check in during an encounter, which I know a lot of people feel uncomfortable with. You know, a lot of people feel like that kills the mood, kills the vibe. And there's just different feelings about this, and we have to find out what camp our partner's in. Do they feel that way? Is it a mood killer? Do you want to communicate in a different way? You know, or are they somebody who loves that? You know, Melissa came on and she said she loves to be asked if she can be kissed. So maybe she also would love to be asked, do you like this? Do you want more pressure, more speed? A different way? Would you like me to use my XYZ body part to do this? And then just a few possible tools for afterwards. You know, when people break down something afterwards, they often call it a post-mortem. Well, I'm going to call this a post-vivum.
After life.
After the life. Yeah. And Amanda Rue, the sex and kink educator, I mentioned her before. What she does with her partner and what they teach is a very simple download afterwards. How's your mind? How's your body? Did I respect all your boundaries? And then I would add, since I like to be forward thinking as well, how could the experience be even better for you? If you want to do a download, you might as well talk about how it could be more delicious in the future. And now it is 7 minutes past, and we have not gotten to the matter of power and privilege, which is so important. Should we stay on for another few minutes? Okay. All right. So you can jump in at any time. Here are my premises on the matter of power and privilege. Consent is influenced by power. And it is important to be aware of your power in a given scenario, as well as in your culture at large, which is often referred to as intersectional feminism. I think that keeps a lot of people from researching this topic. I think we should have more names for it than intersectional feminism and intersectionality. When you ask for consent, are you aware of the ways in which you may have power over the other person that could affect their decision-making and thus their answer to you? So ways that you might have power or privilege over somebody else could be physical, right? I've had sex with a lot of men who are much bigger than me. Emotional. If you're in love with someone, that can really affect your decision-making. Monetary. Make more money than you. For instance, when I was super broke in my early 20s, I had sex with someone because I didn't have cab fare. I didn't have cab fare to go home, and it was cold in New York, and I was scared to ride the subway. It's like 2 a.m. Employment. That can be being employed, being not, or involved with status, the status of your employment. Privilege in society,
race,
which can be status, race, looks. And I think looks is often one that is overlooked, right? So Elaine brought up when I asked this question on Facebook, pretty person privilege, right? So pretty women thinking they don't have to ask for consent, thinking that they can touch anybody that they want because they're a pretty woman.
Yeah.
You know? Or I've also heard of, you know, a gay man at a party grabbing a woman, feeling like, but it's okay, I'm gay, you know? But these things are factors, you know? And there are all different ways in which they intersect to form a picture of power and privilege that is at play when you ask for consent and you give it. I'm going to share a very brief story. So about 7 years ago, I was working on a book proposal, and I reached out to this writer that I knew who had been published many times. And he said, well, yeah, come over and I'll read it and we'll chat about it and I'll give you some advice. And I was like, great, wonderful. So I went over and his wife was there, and I knew that they were in a polyamorous
the story's
relationship. I
terrible.
knew her, and we were in the living room. We were in the living room about to talk, and he said, well, let's go in the bedroom because it's quieter and she's working out here. And I was like, okay. So I went in the bedroom with him, and we were talking about the possibility of getting published. He's like, you really need to establish an online presence. I have a connection at HuffPost that I could easily set you up with, and then you can build your audience that way. And I'm like, that would be wonderful. Thank you so much. And he's, complimenting me as a writer, and I am a fucking great writer. So I took that compliment. Yep. And then he tried to kiss me, and I, turned away and pulled back, and he said no. He did not ask, right? He moved in to kiss me. I gave no. There was no body language. There was no openness. There was nothing. But he dove in, and I turned away and I pulled back, and he was like, you don't want to? And I was like, no. And then awkwardly, we ended that encounter, and he didn't speak to me again for years, never gave me that recommendation to HuffPost, even after I reached out to him about it. And then I called him out publicly at a live event, and that was about consent and Me Too culture. And he offered a mediation reparation process, which we did.
Yeah.
Right. So there are ways back, but that is one of the reasons why people give consent that they don't want to give, is because they are afraid of the repercussions if they don't. So something you could do is preemptively address the person's possible concern about refusing. If you are aware that there is a power and privilege imbalance, you can address that person's possible concern about refusing by saying something like, if you're not available for that, I'll still recommend you to HuffPost. If you don't want to do that, I'll still work with you. If you are not interested, I will still recommend you to that thing I said I would. If you don't want to, I'm still going to be kind to you. We're still going to be friends. I'll still pay for your meal. Yeah. I'll still employ you. You know what I mean? To put that person's mind at ease so that they can make
transactional
a decision that isn't
they can make a decision that isn't transactional. Yeah. I had that with a director when I first moved to New York, and I started doing off-Broadway. And I met the director just, somewhere, and he asked me over, and I was like, sure. And we were reading through things, and he tried to kiss me, and I actually grabbed his face and said, no! And he said, okay, I'm sorry. I was like, don't do shit that's going to make me hate you. And he was like, I'm so sorry. Never try again. The end. And then I worked with him for like 4 more years. He was, he didn't set it up. He didn't verbally prepare me like, you don't have to because I'm still going to work with you, whatever. He listened. He was just a mensch about it. I was not interested and made it abundantly clear. And then he was cool.
Well, and you were incredibly clear because you are strong and able to do so, and aware and have the tools and have the language, right? Thank you for that example.
And in both those cases, there was just the sense of immediacy, like I want it now, and that's the grabbiness, which is sadly what so many, not only women but women, have to defend against, is this seizure.
Yeah. This is why we role play it in self-defense class,
Yeah.
Yeah. So something that Matt and Eric Wyckoff-Rogers, who's a scholar and a historian of sexual relationships, brought up as I was doing research yesterday, is that power and the inequities in our society can shape and control the things that we believe we want, the things that we believe we are choosing of our own volition. And some of those some of those issues are who is considered sexy in our culture. Are those the people that we are attracted to? Like, does that correlate? And have we examined
that's
that?
Like the root of all
Yes.
body dysphoria, you know, which is such a huge thing. I feel like.
Yeah. And it's in this regard, this notion of, if you haven't looked at that the things that you're choosing for what you want, who's consenting to that? Are you just recapitulating someone else's trauma from many generations ago or 2 years ago to say, this is what I actually want? And so in this way, if you're perpetuating these inequities with your own desires, but you think that they're yours and you think they're a good idea, well, then what is consent culture? So part of this is reflective to say, you know, whatever your desires are these actually mine? And whose do they serve? And do I have the freedom to not be bound by the things which I always have found attractive? Because then you're always actually in control and can never be surprised. And that goes back to what we were saying earlier, is that, or at least what I was saying earlier, but we were all talking together about the notion of quickness in a relationship. The reason why we all had similar ideas around, do you like to be asked, can I kiss you, is that we sort of wanted a contextual sense of, a deeper sense of trust that we would know something about this. And we were open to being surprised, because ultimately in a relationship, what feeds it is surprise. You want stability, of course, right, but you also want the capacity for surprise. But you need to trust deeply enough that I trust you enough to surprise me in a way that will devastate me in a way that I would want to be devastated, but I could never predict.
Right.
But if you're only picking the things that you know that you want, you take away the capacity for surprise, and you turn your partner, in theory, to a fulfillment device, into a slot machine that says, just do the things that I like. And so that's worth looking at, about how consent culture doesn't have built into it those structures, to unpack that and make surprise a life-affirming quality that's worth pursuing in relationships.
Consent culture does not, but agency culture sure fucking does.
Agency does, sure.
Yes, a movement
Yeah.
movement towards agency culture. That's what I want to see. The last thing I want to say about the power imbalances that I have written out is that a power imbalance has been, now in enthusiastic consent culture, from what I've seen, a power imbalance has been considered synonymous with being unable to give consent, being incapacitated, being a minor, being intoxicated, being asleep. That is not true. A power imbalance does not negate the possibility of asking for, giving, and freely giving fries consent, right? It doesn't negate that. And for many, many, many of us, just look at porn and you'll see power imbalances and taboos are super hot.
In role play,
right?
specifically.
That's why you see, yes. And there's also the consensual, non-consensual role play that's the extreme of that, right? So in role play, daddy, little girl, teacher, student, dom, sub, right? These are ways of playing with a power imbalance that feels arousing.
Right. But the choice itself presupposes that both players in that role play are coming at it from a position of choice, which means that they must be matched in power from the beginning. Because even a person who goes into deep subspace has negotiated that from a place of power beforehand, where that person can always walk away.
Yeah, you know, anyone who's forced to play is no longer playing.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it takes us into the territory of the erotic mind.
Yeah.
Which is so amazing, and just how all material, all shadow material that we think of as taboo, thank you, John, is has an enormous amount of erotic charge if we don't pathologize it.
Yep.
You know, like nothing's off limits. People who play out rape fantasies don't want to be raped. They want to play out rape fantasies, and those are distinct. You know, so in the erotic space, nothing is off the table, but it has to be.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, it all has to come from a place of choice. And safety.
Which calls to a really important distinction to be made about fantasies, which are fantasies are not necessarily things that you want to happen in real life. Fantasies are fantasies that turn you on.
Sorry, go ahead.
So I'm going to invite you to, I'm going to invite you to make this call for, as Bobby says, agency culture, empathy culture, and communicative culture as I try to get on my computer and end this broadcast.
Well, what do you think, Matt?
We're saying a final thing?
I think we're saying a final thing. I mean, I think what comes up, and this is actually the end of the notes for me, is that all of this begins very early. And of course, you can learn anything at any time. We're completely malleable, plastic, neuroplastic beings who can form new habits and remediate and work with trauma histories and transform ourselves utterly at any point in life. But especially as the mother of a person who's not yet 5, and a person who's been teaching sex ed to kids for a really long time and to teens, I think it's important that all of this groundwork around consent and agency and power and privilege gets laid in very early. The earlier, the better. Yeah,
if you can learn to communicate and be in touch with all these things, these are skills which sadly we didn't all learn well because the culture we didn't even live in a culture that allowed for such a thing. We live in a fractured space where these things weren't allowed. So we're doing a lot of catch-up work, and perhaps we're planting a seed of a tree under whose shade we will never sit, because we're still learning and developing all this. But may it be so that all these things are laid out for fruit bearing and shade for generations to come. May there be generations to receive such a thing.
Amen. May it be so.
May it be so.
Thank you so much to Pamela and Matthew. There are wonderings that we could wonder all day, as I was all day yesterday, about these topics. And maybe it's a larger thing. Maybe it's a long form article. Maybe it's a workshop. But I think my juices are flowing around this topic at the moment. And they will probably continue to. And luckily, I have so many incredible humans to consult with. Pamela and Matt, thank you for your wisdom. Thank you for your friendship. Thank you for showing up. I love you both so, so, so much.
Love you too.
I'm going to end this broadcast, but we will stay. Well, I will stay. You can do whatever you want. Consent.
Thank you. I'm actually going to go to bed.